Have you ever seen a man cry just because of a painting? Ethan, once a millionaire perched at the peak of power, woke after the crash to find he was no longer the man he used to be. Each morning, a woman would quietly wipe his face, feed him spoonfuls of porridge, and speak words no one else would bother remembering. But it was those very words that pulled him back from the edge of despair. And then, because of a simple sketch, his heart, long thought lifeless, broke open and wept. This is where the story begins. In a place where people learn how to love again, starting with a stranger. The sky blazed white through the glass windows on the 49th floor. Early spring meant late sunsets, light lingering like an afterthought, clinging to a day no one had truly wanted. Inside the sleek, glass-walled office, sunlight caught the edge of Ethan Locke's silver watch, flaring briefly like a blade across the white wall. He sat perfectly upright, not leaning back. His left hand rested on a stack of documents inked in bold black. With his index finger, he tapped a steady rhythm against the edge of the desk. The room was so silent that each tap seemed to ricochet off the glass walls and echo back at the people seated across from him, each one holding their breath, waiting for the verdict. Operating costs are up 12%. Investment return is down by 3%. Ethan said, looking up. His voice was flat, precise, stripped of emotion. I don't need explanations, I need action. His gaze moved from face to face, a look people in the industry called the killing stare, sharp enough to slice through $1 million project with just a flicker of his brow. Today, that gaze landed on Marla, the head of operations, who had been with the company for 11 years. Ethan picked up his pen. Without another word, he signed the dismissal form. Marla didn't flinch. She said nothing, but her eyes, wide with pain and understanding, locked on Ethan before she stood. No tears, no pleading. Just a look that pierced through designer suits, past the success and the steel-plated persona he wore like armor. The glass door clicked shut behind her with a soft, final sound, as if all the air had been sucked from the room. Ethan lowered his head and turned the next page. For a moment, his pen hesitated. A flicker of memory surfaced. A boy, 10 or so, doodling on the whiteboard during a meeting, before Ethan's voice lashed out and left the child in tears. But only for a moment. He pushed the memory aside, the way one shuts a window on a gust of wind. He signed again. Beyond the glass, the city moved soundlessly below, miniature and mute, like an old film reel. Cars glinted like specks of light, people scurried like ants, and Ethan, seated high above, it all watched from a place entirely apart. His phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. Elevator under maintenance. Do you need to leave early? He typed a single word. No. No need to hurry. No need to care. The coffee at his elbow had gone cold. He took a sip anyway. Bitter, sharp, metallic. He grimaced, then drank again. Everyone else had left. The meeting was over. His assistant was gone. But Ethan stayed, alone, in the deepening hush, as though silence were the only company that had never let him down. The room was beautiful, but cold. Walnut desk, anti-glare glass, Belgian imported rug, everything meticulously placed, perfect, like the mask he'd worn for 20 years. Whatever was beneath it, he couldn't remember anymore. A final slant of sunlight brushed across his shoulder, pooling faintly on the edge of the desk like a watercolor stain. Ethan exhaled, checked. His watch, 5:58 p.m., At exactly 6:01, the building's security would switch to night mode. The 49th floor would be deserted, and he was always the last to leave. No one waited at home. No one texted, "How was your day?" And he didn't miss it. Or maybe he'd just forgotten what that felt like. Ethan stood. The chair rolled back with a soft scrape, the first sound in nearly an hour. He picked up his black leather case, straightened his collar, and walked toward the elevator. Each step measured, certain, as though even the floor tilted in deference to his power. The elevator dinged. Doors opened. He stepped in, and just before the doors closed, before the last of the golden light faded from the hallway, Ethan shut his eyes. 1 second. Just one. Enough to begin a fall. The elevator doors slid shut behind Ethan with the soft precision of a programmed symphony. No voices, no hurried footsteps, no distant calls. Just a narrow, sealed space where, once again, he stood alone. As always. He was used to solitude. In elevators, in cars, in the penthouse perched highest above the city. Silence didn't unsettle him. On the contrary, it had become a trusted companion, more loyal than any human ever had been. He pressed the button for G. Ground floor. The soft white light overhead reflected against the mirrored walls, revealing a man of 42. Neatly parted hair, crisp white shirt, charcoal gray tie. He stared ahead with calm, unlit eyes. The black leather briefcase by his side, flawless, unscuffed, sat at his feet like a full stop at the end of a sentence. The elevator began its descent. Floor 49, 48, 47. Everything operated smoothly, just like Ethan himself, who had managed a multi-million-dollar investment fund with the precision of a Swiss timepiece, every deal measured in fractions of time and return. Floor 45. A faint click, barely perceptible unless you were there to hear it. Ethan looked up. The light flickered, once, then held. He frowned, not out of fear, but irritation. He disliked anomalies. Anything unplanned was a breach in the structure he lived by. Floor 44. Click, a second sound, longer this time. Then, everything slowed. The elevator didn't stop. Not quite. It staggered as if someone had gently tapped the brakes. A breath later, a piercing crack sliced through the ceiling above. The entire cabin trembled. His briefcase toppled. Ethan instinctively grabbed the handrail. Floor 43 never appeared. The elevator dropped. No warning, no voice, no one to pull anything back. All outside sound vanished. Only the scream of twisted metal remained, long and feral, like a wounded animal unleashed. The descent was vertical, violent. Ethan slammed backward, skull hitting the glass wall, his feet lifting from the floor. In that moment, nothing held weight. Not his case, not his phone, not his body. He tried to scream, but no sound came. His eyes were wide, not from fear, but from disbelief. He, the man who had always been in control, who never allowed a meeting to start a minute late, was now falling into a void with no pause button. How long did the fall last? 3 seconds, 5, or an entire lifetime? The wind outside howled, cables strained until impact. A deep, guttural thud. No explosion, no blinding light. Just the sound of something heavy settling at the bottom of a river. Then, absolute stillness. Ethan felt nothing. His body lay curled, cheek pressed to the cold metal floor. The briefcase was beside him, lid flung open, papers scattered like leaves that no one had time to gather. His eyes were still open, but the gaze was gone. His lids fluttered, then drifted closed, like a curtain falling in a room where the wind had stopped. The glass on his Patek Philippe shattered. The hands pointed. To 6:01 p.m., 1 minute after the workday ended. Outside, the ground floor control panel blinked red. A security guard rushed over, but the internal signal had already gone dead. A nurse finishing her shift on the first floor paused, startled by the tremor in the walls. She had no idea that deep inside this building, a man had just begun to lose everything, and that a long journey was quietly being rewritten, not by human hands, but by the silence of fate. Blinding light pierced his shuttered eyelids. Not the warm, golden kind from the sun, but a cold, sterile white, the kind that only exists in hospitals. Ethan opened his eyes, or rather, he thought he did. It took several seconds for awareness to catch up, for his mind to recognize that his eyes were, in fact, open. Every movement, from the twitch of a pupil to the sense of space, was disjointed, out of sync, as if his consciousness had been dropped into the wrong body. A white ceiling, a fluorescent tube that stretched on forever. The soft, rhythmic beep, beep, of a machine beside his ear, barely audible. But after 3 weeks of absolute silence, each beat struck like a knock on his heart. His throat was scorched dry. Every breath dragged heat through his windpipe. There was something in it, probably a tube. He tried to swallow. His neck refused. "Mr. Locke?" A woman's voice drifted in, gentle as waves brushing a quiet shore. No panic, no emotion, just calm, almost tender. Ethan didn't answer. Not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. He tried moving his right hand. Nothing. Tried his legs. No sensation. The silence became a scream, one that echoed inside his skull, unheard by anyone else. A nurse bent to check the monitors, then looked into his eyes. "We're here," she said softly. "You're safe. You've suffered a serious spinal injury, but you're awake now. That's what matters most." Spinal injury? Ethan wasn't sure he'd heard right, but his body confirmed it faster than words could. Nothing below his chest. Not even a flicker. Something crashed into his chest. Not fear, but a kind of pure, bewildered panic, like waking in the wrong dream and having no way out. His gaze swept the room. White walls, white linens, a white door, everything too clean, too sterile, too foreign. A shadow passed outside the glass pane. A doctor entered, trailed by an assistant, with a clipboard. The man in the lab coat stood beside him, speaking in a tone meant to soothe. But the words blurred, distant, like a radio broadcast from miles away. The signal lost somewhere in the static. Severe cervical trauma. 3 weeks, in a coma, paralysis below. T4, prognosis uncertain. Further observation required. The phrases dropped like shards of glass, clear, sharp, leaving slow, deep cuts. Ethan closed his eyes, not to rest, to hide. In the dark, a memory surfaced. Floor 49. The walnut desk, a cold nod. Marla's name. His voice saying, "I don't need reasons. I need action." And now, here he was. Motionless. unable to wipe his own face, to lift a finger, to nod or utter a simple word. He, whose days once stretched 18 hours long, who made partners wait 12 minutes just to test their patience, who earned the nickname the Boardroom Beast. Now, he couldn't even control his own breath. A single tear slipped free, not from emotion, but from the overloaded circuitry of a body in chaos. He wanted to turn his head away. He couldn't. A soft sigh stirred nearby. The nurse, still there. She didn't look at him with pity, just a quiet gaze, the kind worn by someone who had seen this before, many times. "You can close your eyes and rest," she said. "Waking up doesn't always mean you're ready to understand." The words barely brushed the surface, but it was that very gentleness that cracked something thin and frozen inside him, though he couldn't yet name it. The door clicked shut. He was alone again. No gaze, no voice, just the beep, beep of the heart monitor and the deeper silence, rising within him, the only sound loud enough to touch the bottom of his soul. The fluorescent light above him was still on, still that same sterile white drained of any warmth. But this morning, something was different. Not the light, not the room, a voice. The first voice Ethan had heard since waking days ago. "Good morning, Mr. Locke," a woman's voice. Not young, not old, not clipped like a nurse reading vitals, nor clinical like the doctor's. This voice had been steeped in warmth, steeped in something like chamomile and patience. Patience of the kind that can't be taught. Ethan opened his eyes. He wasn't ready. Not for strangers, not for anyone stepping into the ruins of his shattered world. But the voice didn't wait for permission. "It's 6:40 a.m. I'm going to wash your face, change your linens, and get breakfast started." She stood beside him in a simple white blouse, her brown hair tied low. No makeup, no rush. Her eyes didn't pry. They were as calm as early morning mist. She moved with quiet precision, soaked a warm cloth, wrung it gently, and leaned in. Her hand touched his cheek, warm, unmistakably human, not the gloved indifference of a doctor or the chill of machines. He wanted to turn away. He couldn't. All he could do was stare straight ahead. Statue still. A soul sealed in a frame of bone and skin. "This cloth has a hint of lavender oil," she said, gently wiping his face. "It's supposed to be good for the nerves, but I can change it if it bothers you." He didn't respond. His eyelids twitched, but his gaze remained frozen. She kept going. No questions, no pause. "It's overcast today. Might rain. I think you'd prefer sun, though some people say cloudy skies make it easier to breathe." Her voice wasn't meant to provoke answers. It was simply there to soften the cold silence between two people. One buried behind stone walls, the other quietly sitting at the gate. "My name is Alina Ward. Most people just call me Alina." "I used to teach art," she said, glancing up at him for a moment. "Before I became a nurse." Ethan's brow moved, a flicker, barely there. But it was movement, Alina noticed. She didn't say anything. No cheerful, "You're responding." No flicker of triumph. She just continued as though she'd expected nothing at all. "You don't need to talk," she added with a soft smile, the kind that dimmed the light in the room just enough to make it bearable. "If you want me to stop talking, just close your eyes." He didn't, not because he wanted to hear her, but because he didn't want to surrender, and he no longer had the strength to resist. All morning she moved around him, adjusting pillows, folding blankets, checking lines. She didn't rush. She didn't perform. She didn't make him feel like something to be managed. And through it all, she spoke. To the room, to herself, to him. She told him about a patient she once cared for, a musician who could no longer hear, who learned to feel sound through his fingertips on a wooden table. She talked about growing up in a quiet town where winters were long, where mornings made you want to stay in bed but also made you smile. She didn't ask him how he felt, didn't ask who he missed or what he wanted, questions that, no matter how gently asked, always landed like needles on skin too raw to bear. When she finished, she straightened up, looked at him one last time, not expectantly, but simply with presence. "You don't have to say anything," she whispered. "You made it through today. That's enough for a beginning." Ethan turned his gaze toward the window, where a sheer white curtain stirred gently in the air conditioning. For the first time since waking, he didn't feel alone, not because someone was with him, but because someone hadn't left, even in his silence. 3 days had passed since that first encounter with Alina, and Ethan still hadn't said a word. No movement, no clear gaze, no sign he was adjusting, only silence, thick and clinging, like a fine dust you can't see but feel coating everything. Alina came each morning, just the same. She still wiped his face with the lavender-scented cloth, still shared her bits of quiet talk. The cafeteria served egg sandwiches today. Her niece had drawn a flying cat. The man in the next room finally sat up after 2 long months. Ethan said nothing. He stared through her, as if she were part of the wall, a flicker in the air, irrelevant. Sometimes his eyes even drifted toward the door, as if tracking how much longer until she'd leave. The doctors came. They wheeled in a device for motion sensing therapy. "We'll start muscle stimulation today," one of them said. "Mr. Locke, please nod if you agree." Ethan stared at the ceiling, unblinking, unmoving. His heart beat, but his will refused to join in. They tried a few more times. Then, quietly, they packed up and left. Ethan heard their footsteps fade and felt a strange relief. Relief that no one touched him. Relief that there were no more expectations. Relief in being allowed to disappear, inch by inch, into the hollow shape he was becoming. That afternoon, Alina returned. In her hands was a breakfast tray, chicken soup, a small spoon, and a paper crane folded from a napkin, a detail no one had asked her to include. Ethan shut his eyes as she stepped in. Alina said nothing. No greeting, no coaxing, no disappointment. She sat, placed the tray on the table, removed the lid. The smell of soup filled the room, warm, faintly sweet. Still, Ethan didn't open his eyes. After a while, Alina spoke, softly, like speaking into a dream. "I don't know if you can hear me, but I'd like to read you something. It was written by a former patient of mine." Her voice dipped lower, settled into quiet. "I don't know how to live again, but I don't want to die twice. If someone is near, please don't ask if I'm okay. Just don't walk away." Ethan didn't move, but his chest rose and fell, a little uneven, like ripples under a fog-covered lake. Alina folded the paper, set the crane on the table beside him. She didn't feed him, didn't push. She left the tray where it was and said only this as she turned to go. "I'll come by tomorrow. If you don't want to hear anything, I'll stay quiet, but I'll still be there." Night fell. Light from the hallway spilled under the door. In the dark, Ethan opened his eyes. Not from hunger, Not from fear, but because the quiet had grown so complete he could hear his own breathing. And then, a thought. Just a passing fragment, like a leaf brushing across the heart. Would anyone really stay? If I stayed silent forever? There was no answer. But somewhere deep inside him, a dim flicker of something, like light through mist, began to glow. Not bright, but real. There are silences no words can reach. But in those silences, kindred souls sometimes find one another. And if this story made you pause, just a little, breathe a little slower, maybe that means you felt something truly human. Stay. Because sometimes, the softest things are the ones we need to hear most. Mornings at the rehabilitation center didn't begin with alarms. They began with light. Soft daylight slipping past the curtain folds, gentle as a hand brushing across closed eyelids, and the sound of wheels gliding over tile, a sound Ethan now recognized, even with his eyes closed. It came at the same time each day, 6:40 a.m. Never earlier, never late. The door clicked open. Softly, Alina entered. No cheerful greetings, no forced enthusiasm, no hopeful declarations like, "Let's try harder today." Just quiet footsteps. A breakfast tray placed carefully on the side table, soup, a peeled banana, a glass of warm water, and something small, always tucked beside the napkin. Today, it was a pressed autumn leaf. Next to it, in tiny handwriting, "We are still alive." Ethan didn't look at it directly, but, as always, his eyes flicked, barely. A moment's glance as Alina set the cloth down. She noticed, but said nothing. "Mr. Locke," she said, gently wiping down the bedside table. "It's cloudy today, but there was a full moon last night, perfectly round." She adjusted the curtain. "I left the window slightly open. Morning air's better this way." Ethan didn't move, didn't blink. "A little girl visited the patient next door," she continued, her voice smooth as wind through an empty corridor. "She brought a painting, a rainbow. She called it a bridge between the old world and the new one." Alina looked up at him. He didn't react. She smiled, barely. The kind of smile worn by those who have learned not to expect, but still choose to stay. The days passed, one like the next. Ethan still didn't eat from her hand, but once she left the spoon beside him and turned away, he ate. Slowly, clumsily, sometimes spilling soup down his shirt. She never asked about it, never praised him, never made it a moment. The next day, she laid out a spare shirt, soft blue instead of the usual sterile white. A quiet reply. "I saw, but I'll honor your silence." One morning, as she was cleaning his feet, she paused. "There's a small bruise on your right knee," she said softly. "Might be from the nighttime therapy. I'll ask the doctor to adjust your position." Ethan stared at the ceiling. His left hand twitched, just a flutter of the pinky finger. Alina noticed, but didn't look at him. She spoke in her usual tone. "I'll put a softer cushion under that leg. If it feels wrong, just glance to the left." He didn't, but his breath left him, just a shade longer than usual. 1 week, 2, 3. Alina still came. On time. She never waited for progress, never waited for thanks. She simply arrived. Like a wordless melody playing in a room no one thought to listen to, and Ethan began to watch her. Not obviously, but closely. The way she folded the napkin without, leaving creases. How she angled the glass ever so slightly toward his hand, knowing he couldn't grasp it. How she tested the soup on her wrist, an old habit, quiet and instinctive, the kind no textbook teaches, and he realized he no longer resented her presence, not because she brought comfort, but because she never made him feel like a failing project. She didn't rush him, didn't coax him upright, didn't fill the room with hollow encouragements. She didn't touch his past. She was just there, like grass growing along the roadside, like sunlight through glass, like breath you forget you need until it's gone. One weekend afternoon, a light rain fell. Alina's shift ended early. At the door, she paused, looked toward his bed. Ethan looked out the window. Just a moment, only seconds. But in that still frame, no one left alone. And something strange stirred inside Ethan. He began to wait for 6:40 a.m. just to hear the wheels on tile. The door opened with a soft click. No knock. But that was protocol. Ethan had grown used to these sounds. He lay there as he did every morning, unmoving, eyes half open, ears catching familiar signals from the hallway, cartwheels, the faint rattle of IV tubes, nurses calling one another by numbers instead of names. This morning was different. Alina didn't come. Instead, a male orderly appeared, an unfamiliar face, eyes void of gentleness, filled only with task and timing. "We're going to the activity room today," he said without ceremony. 10 minutes. There's a mirror. Helps with visual reflex training. Mirror? The word slid across Ethan's mind like a flicker of flame skimming ice, too brief to melt anything but sharp enough to leave a crack. They lifted him into the wheelchair, his body supported by soft straps and a cushion at his back. He didn't resist. But his heart pounded harder than usual. Somewhere, deep inside, a part of him knew something was waiting. The activity room sat at the end of the hallway. The lighting there was warmer, not the sterile white of his hospital room. A few green plants, some abstract paintings, classical music playing softly in a corner, and a mirror, a wide mirror spanning the entire right wall. The orderly wheeled him to the center of the room, then stepped away, leaving Ethan alone in the hush. His head turned slightly. His gaze met the mirror, and something inside him shattered. In the reflection, a stranger stared back. Hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, wisps of gray along the temples, patches of uneven stubble, a stiff neck. His left arm slumped unnaturally, wrist bones jutting beneath pale, papery skin. The body, thin, shrunken, dwarfed by a hospital gown that looked borrowed, never his. Ethan didn't recognize himself. The man in the mirror looked like a warped, diminished version of someone who used to wear tailored suits and polish time. Across a Patek Philippe. Someone whose gaze once held the easy arrogance of certainty. He blinked. Once, and the man blinked back, proof that this wasn't an illusion. It was him. A knot twisted deep in Ethan's chest. Not quite fear, not exactly grief. A deeper, sharper thing. Revulsion, disorientation, a quiet, aching shame. He tried to turn his head away. Couldn't. Trapped between his body and its reflection. Between what he was and what he could no longer deny. A sound caught in his throat. Not words, not a cry. Just a broken, breathless hiccup. Like something inside had finally snapped loose. Alina entered. She saw him. His tilted head, his sagging shoulders, like someone struck hard by something invisible. She didn't speak, didn't rush over. She simply walked to the back of the chair and stood behind him, not facing the mirror, not turning him away. Only after a long, quiet moment did she speak. "The day I lost my husband," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "I stood in front of a mirror for a long time. I didn't cry, but I couldn't meet my own eyes." Ethan didn't turn, but moisture blurred his vision. Not tears, just a haze, a quiet veil softening everything. Alina continued, "I don't expect you to look long. I just want you to know, even if you're no longer who you were, you are still someone, still human. And I won't leave, just because your reflection has changed." She stepped behind the chair again. "We can go back now. If you ever want to return here, I'll come with you." Ethan nodded, so slight, but for the first time, a movement born from his own will. Alina noticed, but she didn't say a word. She simply took the handles of the chair and began to push. Slowly, gently, not dragging, not directing, just accompanying. The mirror receded behind them, but inside Ethan, something fragile had begun to form in the space left behind, a soft, aching shape, like the aftermath of breaking, when the pieces lie scattered just enough for someone to begin gathering them. And maybe, for the first time, not to rebuild who he was, but to finally understand who he might still become. That morning, nothing seemed remarkable. No change in Ethan's condition, no shift in the nursing routine. And as always, the door opened at exactly 6:40 a.m. Alina entered with her quiet, steady steps. Ethan had begun to hear her cart from down the hall. Not with his ears exactly, but with some other sense. The way someone can feel dusk approaching just by the way the wind changes. No clock needed, just familiarity, woven into the body like breath. She said nothing when she entered. There was no need for good morning anymore. Her presence had become its own kind of greeting, in the way she folded the washcloth, opened the water cup, and pulled back the curtain just enough to let the light in. Never too harsh, never too dim. Ethan didn't turn his head, but his eyes, today, were different. No longer fixed in their usual stillness. They drifted, slowly, from the patch of sun on the bedsheet to the window's edge, then came to rest on a branch just beyond the glass. A thin branch, stark against the damp earth, dusted with struggling grass, and on it a single green leaf remained, trembling in the breeze caught between the decision to fall or hold on. Alina didn't follow his gaze, but she noticed. She placed the warm cloth gently across his forehead, from hairline to cheek. "It's windy today," she said. "Still cold for early spring. Seems winter doesn't want to let go just yet." Ethan didn't respond, but his eyelid fluttered. Outside, the wind nudged the leaf harder. Then, all at once, stilled, as if it had decided to stay one more day. Alina said nothing for a while. She washed her hands, dried them quietly, then stood beside his bed. Ethan's eyes were still fixed on the window. And that's when she said it. When people can no longer run, maybe they learn to listen. Not a philosophy, not advice, just an observation. Like the way she once watched an old patient tap his fingers just to remind himself he was alive. Or how she once listened to her husband's labored breathing after the accident, Afraid to miss even one last sound, Ethan didn't turn toward her, but his gaze paused, right at the edge of the window pane where the leaf still clung. He didn't nod, didn't furrow his brow, but something in him settled. Not anger, not defeat, something quieter. As if someone had come inside and taken a seat within him, uninvited, unannounced, not to fix, just to listen. Alina walked to the side table and placed down a folded piece of paper. Ethan glanced at it, but didn't unfold it. She didn't point, didn't explain, as if she trusted. If he needed it, he'd read, and if not, that was fine too. Rainbows don't only come after storms, she said softly. Sometimes they come when you just happen to look up. Ethan didn't lift his head, but his heart tilted, just a little. After she left, the room felt quieter than usual. Outside, the leaf was still holding on, and for the first time since the accident, Ethan didn't feel entirely hollow. That line, "When people can no longer run," echoed in his mind like a gentle voice at the bottom of a deep well. Not loud, not urgent, but it lingered, like that single leaf outside the window, light enough to forget, strong enough to stay. Morning light filtered through the white curtain, thin as mist. Ethan opened his eyes. His gaze no longer held the chill of resignation, nor the dullness of despair. It was something in between, quiet and waiting. Nothing about that day was extraordinary. No improvement in his condition, no disruption to the usual routine. At precisely 6:40 a.m., the door opened. Alina entered, her steps as soft as always, but something on the bedside table caught his eye and held it longer than usual. A sketchbook, canvas-bound, pale gray, resting neatly, unannounced, unexplained. No note, no mention. But Ethan knew. There was only one person who left quiet things like that behind, things that spoke for themselves. He didn't open it right away. He simply looked. As if, by gazing long enough, the pages inside might begin to turn on their own. When the light shifted and brushed across the cover at an angle, he noticed the faint edge of a drawing. Just a glimpse, slender graphite lines catching the sun, but enough for an image to begin emerging. He asked a nurse to turn the page. The first sketch stopped everything. A man sat slumped in a wheelchair, his head gently bowed. At his feet, a small child leaned against his father's knee. The boy's hand rested lightly on the wheel, not to push, but to hold. No background, no colors, no facial features, just stillness. And somehow, that simplicity cut deeper than words. Ethan stared, his left hand curled just slightly. A sensation rose in his chest, not sudden, not sharp, but dense, rising slowly like a tide. He tried to swallow. His throat burned, his vision blurred, not from light but from a fine mist pulling in from some place long buried. The first tear landed softly on the pillow, then the second. No one else was in the room. No voices, no watching eyes, just him, and the drawing, and the ache, familiar and distant all at once, finally returning. The boy in the sketch, the tilt of his head, the small hand, the way he sat so close, tightened something inside Ethan. A memory surfaced, unsummoned, a gray afternoon. The backyard of their old house. His son, maybe 7, sitting on the ground with a box of crayons. Drawing a picture of the two of them playing soccer, Ethan had stepped outside, phone still in hand. "Dad, look, I drew us," the boy had called, waving, proud. Ethan hadn't looked, had brushed the boy's hand aside, eyes still on the screen. "Not now, Adam. I'm working." Just a sentence, a glance, a gesture. And now, in this pale room, staring at this sketch, everything returned. No one had to name it. No one needed to explain. One thin line in a pencil drawing, and all he'd tried to forget came rushing back. It struck him then. Maybe he'd been in that wheelchair all along, inside, long before the accident. Only now, his body had caught up with the truth of it. He let his eyes fall from the page, but the weight didn't lift. His heart beat slower, deeper, and with every pulse, another tear slipped free, not loud, not dramatic, but impossibly heavy. Outside the door, Alina stood still. She didn't come in. She didn't need to. Because sometimes, healing doesn't arrive with presence, but with absence, offered at the right moment. Ethan wept, not from weakness, but because, for the first time since the fall, his heart reminded him it was still alive. Morning light spilled through the curtain, softer than usual, or perhaps it only felt that way because Ethan had cried the night before. The tears had fallen silently, leaving behind a hollow feeling that was, somehow, also light. How long had it been since he last spoke aloud? Since waking from the accident, countless people had passed through this hospital room. They left behind questions, instructions, polite well wishes, sometimes even pity wrapped in practiced smiles. But Ethan had remained unmoved, wordless. This morning, Alina returned as always. She said nothing about the sketch that had broken, him open. She simply set down a cup of warm water and pulled another tissue from the box. She didn't ask. That silence didn't make him feel abandoned. On the contrary, it felt like a quiet nod to pain no one needed to name. As Alina wiped his face, Ethan looked at her, not for long, just a moment. But it was the first real look. She didn't comment, didn't acknowledge the change. She continued as if nothing had shifted. But something had. Inside Ethan, something stirred. Not just guilt, still echoing from the sketch, but something deeper. Because if he didn't speak now, in this rare and fragile silence, he might never be heard in quite this way again. His throat tightened. His lips parted. The words rose slowly, from deep inside his chest, pushing through years of silence like water through stone. "I had a son." His voice was raw, like sandpaper scraping along the edges of breath. It cracked at the end of each syllable. Alina looked up, her hand suspended in midair, but her eyes stayed soft. Not surprised, not rushing in, just waiting. Ethan didn't look at her again. His gaze shifted to the ceiling. Light danced against the polished surface above him, the same light he saw every day, but today it carried meaning. His name is Adam. He must be 15 now. Silence. For 7 years, I haven't said his name out loud. Alina said nothing, but her hand moved gently onto his. A quiet promise, wordless and warm. "The day I got divorced," Ethan whispered. He just stood there. Didn't cry, didn't ask anything, didn't hug me. He let out a breath that trembled at the edges. He was only 8, but he already knew. You don't hold on to someone who doesn't want to stay. The sentence landed heavy in the air. It wasn't the pain of something new. It was the pain of something long denied, finally given its name. I chose work. chose power, chose things that made me look big, and abandoned the smallest thing I ever had. The hospital room dissolved. It became a room of memory, where every word was the opening of a box, and pain, finally, had somewhere to go. Alina gave his hand a small, steady squeeze. No advice, no, you shouldn't blame yourself. Just a touch. A reminder that he could still be reached by another human being. Ethan closed his eyes, but not to escape. To hold on to the image of the boy he hadn't named in 7 years. Adam, he whispered like a second birth. Outside the window, the wind stirred the last green leaf on the branch. It hadn't fallen. Like something inside Ethan, fractured but not finished, still reaching for life. A man had spoken today after 7 years of silence, just to say the name of the boy who had once been everything. And if this moment slowed you down, if it made you think of a phone call you've left hanging, you're not alone. Have you ever had something you meant to say, but never did? Tell me about it if you'd like in the comments below. That morning, sunlight filtered gently through the curtains, resting softly across the blanket draped over Ethan's legs. But the light that warmed him more deeply came from something else, the lingering echo of yesterday, when he spoke his son's name aloud for the first time in 7 years. Adam. A name long asleep in the heart of a father who had only just begun to awaken after falling through his own life. Ethan sat propped up in bed, his back supported by 2 pillows, head tilted, slightly to the left. His eyes were calm, trained on the corner of the table where a stack of blank paper sat waiting, beside a thick-handled fountain pen, designed for hands that no longer moved easily. Blank paper. So simple. And yet, to Ethan, it felt like a door. Door leading back to the boy who had once waited for him in the backyard, and then stopped waiting. "Would you like to try writing?" Alina asked gently, noticing how long his gaze lingered. Ethan didn't answer aloud, but he nodded. The first nod meant for something he chose to do, after months of letting the world move him like a tide. Alina quietly fastened the writing board to the bed. She slid a sheet of paper into place, then guided the pen into his left hand, the only one with feeling, though so weak that he had to summon everything just to hold it steady. His fingers trembled, his wrist strained. He reached forward, and just as the pen brushed paper, it slipped and dropped to the floor. Alina didn't sigh, didn't say, "It's okay, take your time." She simply picked up the pen, placed it back into his hand, and held his fingers gently between hers. "I'll steady you. You just move." Ethan drew a breath and began. The first letter, A, uneven, shaky, almost childlike. Then D, slanted left. Another A, the ink blurred from his shaking hand. And finally M, 2 crooked hooks tangled into each other. Adam. He stared at the name, heart pounding as though he'd just run the length of all his years. It wasn't neat, it wasn't straight, but it was his handwriting. The first since the accident, and the first time he'd ever written his son's name with his left hand, the one he used only for holding his phone or opening car doors back when life ran fast. The letter began with simple truth. "Son, I used to be someone who never had time." The ink thinned in the second line. Every word came slowly, each letter costing breath. "No time to hear about your school essay. No time to look at your drawings. No time to ask if you were asleep yet. No time to be home on your birthday that year. Ethan didn't count the lines. His hand hurt. Sweat beaded on his brow, but he kept writing. Now I have time. Too much even. His vision blurred again, but the pen kept moving, dragging its imperfect marks across the page. I can't get up and run with you, but if you'll let me, I'll sit here and listen to every part of the road I missed. At the end, he paused. He didn't sign it. He just added 3 words. Small, fragile as breath. I'm still here. Alina stepped closer. She read it silently, and her eyes glistened. She didn't say, "You did well," didn't praise his bravery. She simply folded the letter, tucked it into a white envelope, and said, "I'll help you send it tomorrow." Ethan nodded again. The second nod of the day. Outside, the sky was clear, not a single cloud, but there was wind, enough to stir the young leaves on the branch just outside the window. Ethan watched them, and for the first time, he smiled. Lips pressed gently together, almost imperceptible. But there, just like the name he had written, awkward, unsteady, but full of effort, full of love, and deeply human. Have you ever written a letter by hand? Sometimes the clumsy, halting lines we write are the most honest words we have. If there's someone you need to write to, maybe today is the day, even if all you write is the very first word. There was something different about the room that morning. Not the light. It streamed in through the curtains the same way it always had, the way time makes its quiet entrance each day. Not the scent of lavender oil or the sound of Alina's careful footsteps. The difference was in Ethan's eyes. After weeks of stillness, after moments of memory and tears, his gaze had changed. It no longer simply watched. It asked to live. Alina entered at exactly 6:40 a.m., just as always. She placed the breakfast tray on the side table, prepared the warm cloth, but when she turned back, Ethan was already looking at her, and he held her gaze, longer than ever before. "Could you take me outside for a bit?" he asked. His voice was still hoarse but clear. Alina paused, just for a breath. A flicker of surprise, gentle, restrained, then she nodded. Of course. The hospital hallway led to a small courtyard in back. A few stone benches, a young maple tree unfurling its first leaves, and a row of purple flowers not yet open. Ethan had never seen it. He'd never asked. Before, when nurses suggested fresh air, he closed his eyes in silence. But today, he had spoken first. Alina guided the wheelchair slowly, steadily, her grip firm, unhurried, as if she understood. This was not a stroll. This was a crossing. Outside, the morning light brushed his forehead. The breeze touched his cheek, not cold, not sharp, but just warm enough. The scent of earth, a trace of flowers, the sound of birds somewhere above. He inhaled deeply. His chest rose, slow and strained, but it was the first breath that belonged to him. They stopped in a corner of the courtyard, beneath the trees' spreading shadow. Ethan said nothing for several minutes. He simply sat and looked. Really looked. Ants moved across the stone. Maple leaves swayed. Sunlight flickered over the tiled path. Everything once overlooked now became evidence that the world was still moving, and he was still in it. Alina stayed beside him. She didn't ask how he felt. She didn't say, "This is progress." She was just there. A companion, not a guide. Back in the room, Ethan paused in front of the table. He looked at the meal tray, the gleam of the stainless steel spoon beside the bowl of soup. "I'd like to feed myself," he said. Alina met his eyes. This time, there was no surprise, only patience. "I want to relearn it," he added softly but with certainty. "How to use a spoon." She moved the table closer, aligned it with his left side. Then, sat opposite him and picked up another spoon. "We'll start with the grip," she said, her voice as light as the sun spilling through the window. His hand trembled. His wrist was stiff. The spoon slipped often. Soup spilled. Sometimes he missed the bowl entirely, the spoon clinking against its edge. But he didn't stop. He didn't wince. Didn't pull his hand back like before. He simply tried again. Each time the spoon touched his lips, he moved slowly, as if every drop was a declaration. "I am not gone. I still get to choose." By the final spoonful, his arm ached, his shoulder throbbed, but his eyes were brighter. Alina wiped the corner of his mouth, then looked at him and said, "You fed yourself today." Ethan didn't respond, but his gaze held the faintest smile, not for her, but for himself. That afternoon, when the sky dimmed with incoming clouds, Ethan asked to sit by the window a little longer. The wind stirred gently across his face. The light softened. No one said it aloud, but in the hush that followed, something quiet echoed between them. "I've begun to live again, with a look, a spoonful of soup, and a very small asking." Every morning, Ethan woke with a dull ache in his shoulders and spine. It wasn't just physical pain. It was a quiet, daily reminder. Today, again, would begin from zero. But unlike before, he no longer turned his face to the wall. He waited for Alina, not for care, but for company. After breakfast, he was wheeled down to the physical therapy room. The route was familiar by now, but never routine. Each trip presented a new challenge, a new limit to nudge. Maybe it was holding his head upright 5 seconds longer. Maybe a barely there lift of the shoulder. Alina always walked beside him. She didn't say much. She didn't cheer when he moved a few more centimeters. But her hand was always there, steady, quiet, ready to catch him whenever he faltered, physically or otherwise. That morning, the therapist decided to try thumb activation. "Mr. Locke, today we'll attempt a simple command," the technician said, calm as ever. "I want you to imagine moving your right thumb. Just imagine it. No force. If there's a response, even the smallest, we'll detect it." Ethan looked at his right hand, thin, still, resting on the pad beside him. How many times had he stared at it like this, as if it were a foreign object? It had once signed contracts, gripped a steering wheel, fastened cufflinks, lifted champagne. Now it simply lay there, like something no longer his. He closed his eyes, not to escape, but to imagine. A child, an afternoon, a small hand reaching out, a finger trying to draw the letter A on a board. Ethan's breath slowed. He clenched his body, not harshly, but as if drawing every ounce of will into one place. Thumb. Bend. Just once. Please. Seconds passed. Nothing. The technician was about to remove the electrode pads when a flicker, so small it could have been a trick of the eye. But it wasn't. Ethan's right thumb twitched. Just once. Just slightly. But unmistakably. The room fell silent. Alina's eyes were fixed on his hand, then lifted to meet his. Ethan didn't breathe. His eyes widened, not in surprise, but in something deeper. The thumb, this quiet, forgotten part of himself, had spoken, and what it said was, "I'm still here." Ethan began to cry. Not a flood, not a breaking dam, just slow, persistent tears, holding on to his cheeks like the words he never spoke, now slipping free. Alina took his left hand gently into hers. She didn't say, "Congratulations." She didn't say, "That's amazing." She leaned close and whispered, soft enough to protect the moment, "You've won. Not because your thumb moved, but because you didn't stop waiting for it to come back." That afternoon, back in his room, Ethan didn't nap like he usually did. He stayed awake, not from pain, but because for the first time, he didn't want to miss anything he might still feel. He looked at his right hand as if seeing a long-lost friend return from somewhere far away. In his gaze, there was a glimmer. Not bright, but steady, like a candle that had finally found the wind. From the smallest motion, he began to believe that every great thing could begin again, even from the place that once seemed like the end. Since the first time his thumb moved again, Ethan had begun to believe that this body, though limited, still held the power to return to life. Each morning he practiced squeezing his left hand, lifting the spoon slowly, bracing his right shoulder, just to keep his head upright for a few seconds longer. The changes were small, often invisible to others. But to Ethan, they were proof. Not that he was still alive, but that he was living again, piece by fragile piece. That morning, Alina didn't come in carrying a breakfast tray. Instead, she held a long, slender wooden box, worn but clean. She set it on the table beside his bed, in front of him. "These were my old drawing pencils from when I used to teach," she said, her gaze gently meeting his. "Yesterday, the hospital reopened the art class for recovery patients. If you'd like to try—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Ethan's eyes had already answered for him. He nodded. Slow, but sure. The activity room was on the first floor, where sunlight spilled through a wide wall of glass. Paintings were taped to the walls, mostly untrained, full of color and chaos and feeling. They were messy and honest. Alina wheeled Ethan to the long table in the center. A few others were already there, an elderly woman painting dots, a young man smearing watercolors with crooked lines, and a boy who hadn't spoken since his accident. Ethan looked at them. No one looked back. There were no curious stares, no pitying glances, no reverent nods of recognition, the kind he'd once grown used to in boardrooms and conference halls, and because of that, he felt light. For the first time, he was just someone ordinary. Alina placed a pencil in his hand. "I'll sit just behind you. If you want help steadying your hand, I'll be here. If not, I'll just watch." Ethan didn't speak. He looked down at the blank paper. No outline, no prompt. Just a clean space, like his life now, waiting for its first line. He thought of the old sketch, the father in the wheelchair, the child, resting his head on his knee. That image had never left him. He drew a curve. It shook, his wrist wobbled, the pencil slipped past his intent. But he didn't stop, didn't erase, didn't start over. He kept going, stroke by trembling stroke, a loose oval for a face, a long shape for the torso, two lines bent down into wheels, a small hand reaching out, The more he drew, the brighter his eyes became. Not because the drawing was good, but because he was reconnecting with something long buried, the soft, fragile part of himself he had once hidden behind tailored suits and seven-figure deals. His hand ached, his shoulder burned, but he didn't let go. When he finished the final detail, a tiny dot near the father's foot, like the button on a little boy's old shirt, he lowered the pencil and looked at what he'd made. No one commented, no applause, no judgment. Only Alina, who stepped quietly forward, leaned in, and placed her hand on his shoulder. A soft squeeze. A thank you without words. A yes without a question. And in that moment, Ethan understood. He was becoming the kind of man his son could one day recognize, not by his power, but by his presence. That afternoon, he asked to keep the drawing with him. He asked Alina to laminate it, not to display, to hold. Because for the first time he had drawn what he could never say, not just a picture, but a promise. Uneven, imperfect, and true. That afternoon, the activity room was quieter than usual. Ethan sat near the window, soft light spilling across the laminated sketch he kept close. The drawing had no color, just trembling pencil lines of a father and his son. Crude, simple. But to Ethan, it was a visual journal, a page where no words were needed, no explanations owed. Beside him sat a boy, 15 or 16, his head buzzed short on the sides, his face still young but his eyes older than they should be. He'd come to the center after a motorbike accident. His left leg had been in a cast for nearly a year. They rarely spoke, Ethan and the boy, but they often sat near each other in therapy, not for conversation, more like a quiet kind of companionship. That day, the boy stared at the sketch for a long time. He didn't ask, "Who drew this?" or "Who is it?" Instead, he said, quietly, dryly, and yet with a clarity that hit, the hollowness in Ethan's chest. "Have you ever apologized to someone?" Ethan froze, his hand pressed lightly over the drawing, almost as if to hide it, but he didn't answer. The boy wasn't trying to pry. He wasn't preaching. He said it like someone speaking to himself, saying what he wished someone had said long ago. "I used to wish," the boy added, gaze still forward, "that my dad would apologize to my mom. Just once. Just that. But he never did." Ethan stayed silent. Not because he had nothing to say, but because there was too much, and no clear place to begin. Later, after everyone else had left, Ethan remained in the same seat. That question lingered, like a needle pressing through the thick layers of armor he'd worn for most of his life. Have you ever apologized to anyone? That night, in the low amber light of his hospital room, Ethan picked up his phone. He moved slowly, carefully. His left finger hovered over the screen. In the search bar, he typed AADAM. The name appeared, still there in his contacts. Never deleted. Never called again. He stared at it, not like a phone number, but like a door he hadn't dared to open. Then, he pressed and held and tapped call. It rang once, twice. He nearly ended it. On the fourth ring, a voicemail picked up. "Hi, this is Adam. I can't come to the phone right now." Ethan didn't leave a message. He set the phone down. His hand trembled, but he didn't cry, because this time he hadn't called to be answered. He'd called because he knew, if he didn't start, there would never be a reply. The next morning, when Alina entered the room, Ethan told her everything. He didn't hide it. "There was a boy in the art class," he said. He asked if I'd ever apologized to anyone." Alina didn't respond at first, but her eyes, soft, direct, seemed to say, "And you dared to try." Ethan gave a small laugh. "I called. He didn't pick up. But I called." Alina nodded. "Just once." Then said, "Forgiveness doesn't always come quickly, but it often begins with the first call." Later that day, Ethan asked to sit outside again. The wind was cool, but the sun was warm enough. He looked up at the tender new leaves on the tree branches and thought, they were once bare too. And still, they dared to bud again. Sometimes the shortest questions awaken the deepest truths in us. Have you ever truly apologized with your whole heart? Tell me your story, because maybe the apology you never gave is still waiting for you, just a call away. Evening fell early. The last light of day stretched across the tiled floor, slanting through the window glass in a quiet ribbon of gold. In the monochrome room, the heart monitor ticked in its steady rhythm, but inside Ethan, everything was uneven. His phone vibrated on the bedside table. An incoming call. The name on the screen, Adam. No photo. No emojis. Just 5 letters, plain, stark, and enough to tighten Ethan's chest with a single glance. He reached for the phone with his left hand, the one growing stronger, steadier with practice. His thumb hovered over the green icon. He didn't touch it right away. His eyes didn't leave the screen, but his breath stalled in his throat. His jaw tensed. His eyes narrowed, not from the light, but from something cracking open inside him. 2 rings passed. Then Ethan pressed accept. Call connected. No voices. No "Dad?" from the other end. No background noise. No cars, no chatter, no distant music like he'd imagined. Only silence. But not empty silence. A silence filled with something fragile, breathless. Ethan held the phone to his ear. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out, not because he didn't know what to say, but because everything he wanted to say came at once, and all of it caught somewhere in his chest, dissolving into a breath he couldn't quite exhale. Then he heard a breath. Barely there, but real. Breath on the other end of the line. It might have been Adam. It might not have. But it was enough, and it said more than words ever could. Ethan closed his eyes. A tear slipped out. Slowly. Not rushed. It traced down his cheek, over the crease by his mouth, and disappeared into the collar of his hospital gown. He held the phone to his ear for 10 more seconds, just held it. No apology, no explanation, no confessions of missed birthdays or old regrets. Because in that moment, being there, in stillness, was the first thing he could offer. And Ethan understood. Sometimes, people don't need words. They just need to know someone is still listening. The screen dimmed. The call ended, neither of them hanging up. No click, no call-ended message, just a soft vibration, like a door closing gently behind someone, leaving a sliver of light on the floor. Ethan set the phone down. His hand gripped the blanket, not to hold an emotion, but to memorize this moment with his body. That night, Alina came in as usual. She saw the red in his eyes, but didn't ask. She placed her hand on his shoulder and sat beside him, like a quiet shadow, near enough to remind him he wasn't alone, but far enough to give space for his ache. Ethan said nothing. He simply looked at the sketch on the table, and for the first time, nodded slowly to himself. I dared. No one would ever know for sure if Adam had answered with intention. No one could say if he recognized the number. But Ethan knew. He had broken the silence. He had called, and he had stayed, without needing to say a single word. That morning, the wind had shifted. The sun still rose, but its light was muted behind a veil of ash-gray clouds. Alina entered the room and found Ethan already awake. He wasn't staring out the window like he usually did. He wasn't sitting quietly, eyes resting on the laminated sketch he kept near. He was looking directly at the table, at the brown leather notebook and the freshly sharpened pencil laid neatly beside it. "Could you bring me a fresh sheet of paper?" he asked, his voice steady, clear. Alina didn't ask why. She simply peeled the last page gently from the notebook's spine and placed a new one in its place. Then she stepped back, leaving space for whatever needed to be written. Or faced. Ethan lifted the pencil in his left hand, slowly. This time, it wasn't like the others. He wasn't forcing the strokes or trying to sketch a version of himself he thought his son might accept. He had learned by now. Adam didn't need a perfect picture. He needed the truth. Each word was written as if it might be the last he'd ever get to say. "Adam, I don't know if you've kept this number, or if you ever read the first letter I sent. Maybe you tore it up. Maybe you threw it away. If I were you, at your age, I probably would have done the same. But if you're holding this letter now, I ask one thing. Please don't read it with your head. Read it with your heart. Because only the heart can understand what words too often betray." The pencil paused. Ethan closed his eyes. A long breath. Then he continued. "For 7 years, I haven't truly apologized to you. The things I wrote, the things I said, they were for my own comfort, not to heal the cut I left in you. This time, I'm just saying I'm sorry. Not to earn anything, not to undo anything. Just this. I was wrong." His hand trembled slightly. He inhaled. The pencil moved again. "I was wrong to believe a career could hold a family together. Wrong to let an 8-year-old child come up with his own reasons for why his father wasn't there. Wrong to think silence was the gentlest way to leave someone behind." The pencil stopped. A tear fell, blurring one of the words. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. That's a gift only the forgiver can offer. I'm only saying, if one day you need someone to sit with you, even in silence, I'm still here, no wisdom, no fatherly advice. Just someone who once ran too fast, now learning how to sit still, to breathe, and to listen." He crossed out a line, then wrote the final sentence, slowly. "I miss you, and I'm sorry it took me this long to say something. So simple. Dad, Ethan Locke." He folded the letter carefully. His hands shook, but he didn't ask for help. He needed to do this, every part, with no one's hand but his own. Just his heart, guiding him. Alina returned, as if she'd been waiting outside for this exact moment. "It's done," he said. He didn't explain. She took the letter, slid it into an envelope, and paused. "Would you like me to send it now, or keep it with you until the moment feels right?" she asked. Ethan turned to the window. The light had faded into something softer. Not bleak, just quiet. It was a morning like any other. But to him, it was the first morning he had lived fully, facing the one thing he had avoided for years. "Send it," he said. "My son deserves to know." His father didn't just write a letter, he rewrote the rest of his life. That morning, the air turned cold. A thin veil of mist clung to the hospital window, softening the light, no longer harsh, but breathing gently through the white curtains. Ethan had been awake for hours. His hand rested on the edge of the table, next to the letter he had written to his son, copied neatly, though still with a tremble in the strokes, folded in thirds. Beside it lay a sheet of scratch paper, covered in crossed-out lines, things he hadn't dared write directly. He unfolded the letter once more, not to check for errors but to read it as if he were someone else. A stranger reading the words, of a father who had missed too many years. His eyes stopped on a line halfway through. The ink wasn't bold, the sentence wasn't elegant. But when he read it, his chest tightened. "I can't run like I used to, but I can still love you." Repeated it in his mind, slowly, like a prayer. He couldn't run. No more backyard soccer games. No more lifting a boy over puddles. No more chasing laughter through the park. No more piggyback rides under wide summer trees. All of that was behind him now. Flickers of film played in reverse, fast and painful. Ethan exhaled and closed his eyes and remembered the last time he had truly run for his son. Adam had spiked a fever in the middle of the night. His wife was already calling the doctor, searching for a cool cloth. Ethan stood in the middle of the room, holding his phone, torn. He had an early meeting the next morning. He ran, not to the hospital, but out of the room. To get medicine, he said. He thought it was helpful, but in the eyes of the child curled into his mother's arms, the silhouette disappearing through the door was something else entirely. It was the shape of a man choosing something else, instead of staying. Now, seated in his wheelchair, a pencil resting in his left hand, Ethan understood. Love doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be true. I can't run, but I can still love you. He might not carry his son on his shoulders, but he could sit beside him in silence when silence was needed. He might not protect with strength, but he could shelter with understanding. He couldn't undo the past, but he could live rightly into the future. He wrote that line again, on a small square of paper, carefully, separately, folded it, slipped it into the worn leather wallet he kept close. Not to send, to keep. As a quiet vow, late but real. That afternoon, Alina returned with an envelope, sealed, postmarked with that day's date. Ethan didn't ask. He glanced at the stamp, touched the edge of the envelope with his fingers, then set it gently back down. "You helped me write," he said softly. "But now I want to learn how to carry love with my own hands." Alina nodded, saying nothing. Later, Ethan asked to go outside, to the second-floor balcony where cold wind threaded between the slats and a small maple tree was budding through the chill. He sat for a long time. His eyes followed the movements of every leaf. The breeze combed through his thin silver hair, but he didn't shrink from it. He didn't shiver. He had once run from so many things: responsibility, feelings, memories. Now, unable to run anymore, he was finally learning how to stay still, to love. No speeches, no urgency, no pleading for forgiveness, just presence. Just a heart, learning how to become a father, from the very beginning. Early morning. The sky a pale wash of milk, clouds drifting slowly, as if searching for the right way forward. In the hospital room on the second floor, there was no sound but the soft rhythm of IV drops sliding through plastic tubing. Dawn light, pressed gently through the sheer curtain, brushing against the pale folds of Ethan's hospital gown, casting soft lines across the age-worn map of his face. He had woken earlier than usual, not from pain, not from the rumble of hospital carts in the corridor, but from something unfamiliar, a lightness that made his chest feel strangely full, a restlessness that didn't come from his body. He didn't know what it was exactly, but his heart beat unevenly, as if waiting for a message, or a voice from the past. On the table beside him lay a plastic-covered copy of the letter he'd sent. The words, handwritten with his unsteady left hand, still held the shape of his breath. Tilted lines, soft indentations, still alive. I can't run like I used to, but I can still love you. He had recited that line to himself 100 times. But this morning, for the first time, he let it echo through his chest. Not just as a thought, but as something he believed. 12 a.m. A knock, so soft it might have gone unnoticed in any other place at any other time. Alina, tidying a small tray of medicine bottles near the bed, paused mid-motion. Ethan lifted his gaze toward the door. He said nothing, just looked, with an unmistakable clarity. "Go ahead," he said. Alina crossed the room and opened the door. A young man stood there, tall, thin, wearing a slate-gray hoodie, a backpack slung over one shoulder. The hallway light fell behind him, and for a moment the figure in the doorway looked like a photo recovered after years lost in a drawer. He didn't smile. He wasn't nervous. He just stood still, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed ahead. Alina stepped aside. No one introduced him. No one needed to. Every part of the room recognized him. It was Adam. 7 years. 7 missed holidays. 7 canceled birthdays. 7 summers without camping trips. 7 times. Adam had waited for a call that never came. 7 times. Ethan picked up the phone and never pressed the green button. All of it stood still in this single breath. Adam walked in. Slowly. No glancing around. No questions. He walked until he stood directly in front of the wheelchair. The man sitting in it once the strongest figure in his memory and the deepest cut no one ever talked about. Ethan looked up at his son. His eyes narrowed, not from light, but from everything rising inside him too fast to sort. His face softened, but his mouth didn't know what to do with itself. He simply whispered a name, trembling, low. Adam. The name fell from his lips like a child's first word. Not loud, not rushed, but real. Adam didn't answer, didn't repeat it. He just looked at his father. Then he knelt and hugged him. No words, no blame, no apology. Just an embrace. The first in 7 years. Not tight, but sure. Not long, but long enough for Ethan's heart to break in the best, most necessary way. Ethan couldn't lift his arms, but he leaned his face into his son's shoulder. His entire frame, once hardened by power, by business, by walls, melted. A tear fell onto the soft fabric of Adam's hoodie. Ethan didn't wipe it away. Adam didn't pull back, because that tear said everything, All the unspoken "I'm sorry" Zalt. The missed "Dad" all the nights Ethan hadn't been home. "I got your letter," Adam said, voice low, catching. "I wasn't sure I wanted to read it, but I did, and I figured, if you still wanted to love me, I've never stopped loving you." Ethan closed his eyes. A smile. Not for show, not for anyone to see, but for himself. A quiet smile of forgiveness. He nodded. He didn't need to say more. Alina stood at the doorway. She didn't enter. She didn't interrupt. She simply smiled, warmly, and turned away. Because the father and son had finally met again, not with words, but with a hug. That afternoon, they sat together on the balcony. They didn't rehash the past. They didn't ask why. Adam just talked about school, classmates, and half-formed dreams he once let go of. Ethan listened. He didn't try to explain, didn't offer advice. He just stayed. And that, more than anything, was what the boy had needed all those years. Maybe we all have a hug we've missed, a person who waited longer than we realized. If you've ever wished you hugged someone sooner, then you understand Ethan and Adam. We can't rewind time, but we can turn back and hold tight while we still can. Who are you thinking of right now? Dusk fell like a soft curtain. The last light of the day poured honey gold across the hallway floor of the hospital's second wing. The room was as quiet as ever, but today something was unmistakably different. Ethan sat still in the hush, his left hand resting lightly on the armrest of his wheelchair. The door had closed not 30 minutes ago after Adam had left, but the feeling, that lingering hum in his chest, was as if someone had touched his heart and left behind a different rhythm. Slower, deeper, more true. Ethan didn't cry, didn't call for anyone. He just sat there, eyes resting on his hand, the one that had once trembled over every word in that letter, now steady, now certain. A hand that suddenly wanted to do something. Not for anyone else, but for himself. No prompting, no permission. He turned the wheel slowly. The chair pivoted toward the balcony, where the light was angling low, soft gold slanting past the railings, and laying long uneven shadows on the floor. He paused, then pushed forward. For the first time since the accident, Ethan wheeled himself outside. The distance from his room to the balcony was maybe 5 meters. But for Ethan, it was the longest, quietest journey of his life, not because it hurt, not because he was tired, but because every turn of the wheel moved him past something. Every hallway, every echo, every frozen memory of stillness and resignation. There was no applause, no Alina beside him, no one waiting to say, "You did it." It was just Ethan, and the desire to see the sky, unfiltered by glass. When the chair touched the balcony's edge, he stopped. The breeze met him, carrying the late scent of bougainvillea blooming somewhere along the garden fence. The chirps of evening birds rose faintly, not music, not noise, just a gentle signal that the world still turned, and today he had returned to it. Ethan breathed in, his chest pulled tight, then released, spring air, cool, brushed with a chill, but this time he didn't shiver. He let the wind touch his face, let the sun paint his hands with the last light of the day, and he simply sat, not thinking about the company, not chasing after deals or numbers, not checking his phone, just being, like a man alive again, for the very first time. Below, a boy crossed the courtyard, his backpack slipping from one shoulder. Ethan watched, not because the boy looked like Adam, but because there was something in the boy's gaze he had forgotten existed. Wonder. When he was CEO, Ethan used to say, "We don't have time to hesitate. Decisiveness is survival." Now, he knew, hesitating a little, noticing a little, sitting still a little, was also survival. Sometimes it was living more deeply. The day dimmed faster than usual, the wind cooled, the light thinned. The sky turned amber, then dusky violet. Ethan didn't rush back in. His hand stayed on the wheel, but he didn't push. Inside, something softened, not sadness, but release. Not giving up, but letting go of all the things that didn't need to be clenched anymore. Behind him, Alina stepped into the room and found the chair empty. She started to call out, but stopped. Then she followed the quiet trail to the balcony. No fuss, no worry. She simply stood behind him. Didn't ask, "Are you okay?" Didn't say, "Why didn't you call me?" She just stood, watched, and smiled, because the man who had once been powerless in a hospital bed was now living, truly living, by his own hand, and with a heart that had learned how to love again. After returning to his room from the balcony that evening, Ethan felt lighter than the waning sunlight outside. Not in body, his back still ached, his shoulders throbbed, but in mind. It was as if something that had been knotted tight inside him for years had finally been loosened. Alina was tidying the bed. When she turned, Ethan was sitting upright in his wheelchair, hands resting neatly on his lap, eyes meeting hers, wearing the gentlest smile. Not wide, not rehearsed, just a soft curve at the corner of his mouth, quiet as a pencil line in a sketch. But to Alina, it was the first time Ethan had truly smiled. "Thank you," he said, low and steady. She didn't reply, just returned the smile and pulled a chair closer. "Today's porridge has ginger," she said as she set the tray on the rolling table clipped to his chair. "Helps with digestion." Ethan looked at the steaming bowl. Then, unexpectedly, he lifted the spoon, scooped. A full portion turned to Alina and offered it toward her. His hand trembled, but the spoon stayed level. "My turn to take care of you." Alina blinked. A quiet pause. Then, she laughed. Not loudly, not for show. A short, gentle laugh, like wind rustling leaves across a quiet courtyard. "Are you messing with me?" she asked, her eyes glinting with something lighter than surprise. "Just being fair," Ethan said, feigning seriousness. "I should learn how to care for people, too." Alina tilted her head. She didn't accept the spoon, but she didn't reject it either. "So, where would you start?" Ethan looked at the spoon. The porridge was thick, still steaming. His hand ached. "Start with even scooping," he said. "The first time I spilled everything. Now you only lose a third. Progress." Ethan nodded. They laughed together, not loudly, but enough to echo in the room that had once felt heavy with silence. The laughter didn't erase memories, didn't smooth over scars, but it made space, a space where silence no longer felt like loneliness. Ethan set the spoon back in the bowl, scooped another, and brought it to his own lips. Still unsteady. But this time, nothing spilled. His eyes lingered on Alina for a moment before he asked quietly, "How long have you been here?" "Almost 8 months. Longer than I thought." "You wouldn't have noticed. You didn't look at anyone for the first month." Ethan nodded, a nod of someone no longer afraid to own his mistakes. When I was working, if someone hadn't produced value within 6 months, I replaced them. And now, he didn't answer immediately. He looked toward the window. The curtain fluttered. The light softened. Now I know. Sometimes value isn't in efficiency. It's in the fact that someone stayed, even when you weren't ready to see them. Alina said nothing, but her hand gently rested on the armrest of his wheelchair. They continued the meal. No need for more words. Ethan ate slowly but steadily. Each spoonful he scooped and lifted on his own, unhurried, deliberate. Not because the food was special, but because for the first time, eating felt like nourishing himself, not fulfilling a task. As he neared the end of the meal, Ethan turned back to Alina. I used to think I didn't need anyone. Alina looked up. She didn't speak. I thought if I was smart enough, rich enough, powerful enough, I'd never feel the lack. His voice slowed. But I was wrong. Because if you never learn how to receive, you'll never know how to love. Alina lowered her gaze. She didn't say, I know. She didn't reply, you've changed. She just sat like she always did, present, without needing acknowledgement. And in that quiet, Ethan understood, a man who can no longer stand, can still make someone laugh, and someone who once needed care can become a place of safety for someone else. All it takes is the courage to lift a spoon and say, my turn to take care of you. Evening had settled completely. Outside the glass, clouds bloomed across the sky in strokes of violet and amber, like watercolors painted without outlines, soft and fading. The small room on the second floor was steeped in a kind of quiet light. Not light exactly, but a stillness known only to those who had once been broken, the kind that didn't speak but listened. Ethan remained in his place, in the familiar wheelchair, now comfortably propped with a cushion after dinner. The bowl of porridge was empty, but the warmth of the conversation lingered in the air and the sound of a laugh. Thin, but real. Alina was rinsing a teacup at the small corner sink. Her movements were calm, practiced, but her shoulders hung lower than usual. When she turned, Ethan saw it immediately, not because he was sharp, but because ever since he'd learned how to truly see, he'd stopped using his eyes to judge and started using them to feel. You all right? He asked softly. Alina startled slightly, as if she hadn't expected him to ask. She nodded, reflexively, then paused. No. I just thought of someone. Ethan didn't press. He waited. My husband, she said, eyes not meeting his but resting on the curtain. He passed 3 years ago, an accident. So sudden I didn't even get to say, I'll be home late tonight. Her words fell like a dry leaf landing on a still pond, gentle but sending ripples far down. I was teaching at the middle school. Parent-teacher meetings ran late. After 6, he texted, I'll grab milk on the way home. She paused. That was the last message. Ethan said nothing. His left hand twitched slightly, wanting to reach out, then pulling back. People told me I should be grateful he went quickly. No pain, but I never knew how to be grateful for that, when I still hear him knocking at the door every night, in my memory. Her voice didn't shake, but it went deep. I stayed in the house 6 more months. Every time I came home, I still turned left at the hallway, where he used to wait for me. Ethan exhaled, a breath too quiet to comfort, but Full of quiet understanding, he began. I slept on a leather couch in the boardroom for 3 straight years. Every morning, I woke up facing a strategy board, not a photo of my family. And now, she asked, now I have no photos left, but I have a sketch drawn with my left hand and my son's name, written again for the first time, as an apology. Alina turned to him. She didn't speak. Ethan reached out. This time, he didn't pull away. His left hand, frail and trembling, ached with effort, but remained extended. Alina placed hers gently over it. A touch. Very human. Not to rescue. Not to hold tightly. Just to say, I've lost too. But I'm still here. And so are you. I used to think grief was something you had to carry alone, Ethan whispered. Grief, Alina replied, is like a heavy winter blanket. If you share it, it doesn't crush anyone. It just warms. No one laughed. No one said, "That's true." They simply sat side by side in the muted room, laying down pieces of pain they'd never dared speak aloud before. Not even to themselves. The sky darkened. The shadow of a tree spilled across the wall, like a black and white film reel playing in silence. Ethan turned toward the soft light filtering behind the curtain, his voice rough. Maybe. We're not meant to get over grief. Maybe we just need someone to sit beside us while we're still in it. Alina nodded. Her hand stayed resting on his. And in that moment, where no one was weaker, no one stronger, 2 hearts that had once been severed began learning how to stitch again. One quiet thread at a time. The late afternoon was still. The wind wasn't strong, but enough to stir the white curtain beside the window, softening the room's edges. Outside, the sky had turned the pale green-blue of early summer dusk. The birds weren't singing anymore. Not clearly, but their faint presence lingered, just enough to remind the world was still turning, gently. Ethan sat at the low table by the window. His pencil had been freshly sharpened. Before him, a blank sheet of paper, unlined, untouched, without prompt or title, just white space. Exactly like his 32nd year. Bright, brimming with confidence, but hollow underneath. He placed the pencil to paper. His left hand still trembled slightly, but the first line no longer bent off course the way it used to. Each word landed like the step of a man learning to walk again. Cautious, steady. He began. To Ethan, age 32. You think you're invincible. I know. I was you once. You wake every morning and check your email before you even brush your teeth. You have 7 assistants, 10 meetings a day, and a dream bigger than your body can hold. You think people love you because there's something in you they can lean on. Your talent, your money, your ambition. But, Ethan, love doesn't live at the top of the staircase. It sits beside you when you finally learn how to sit down. I'm not writing to blame you. I'm writing to say, I understand why you chose to live that way. Because you're afraid. Afraid of the day people look at you and don't see anything special. Afraid of losing what they call your glow. And so, you run at all costs. Ethan paused, lifting his gaze to the sky, where a smudge of ash-purple cloud had curled like a bruise into the pale evening. Then he continued. You put success above everything. But, Ethan, success, when there's no one to share it with, is just a prettier version of being alone. I don't blame you for working yourself to the bone. But I grieve for the moments you missed, like the way your son used to watch the door every night, waiting. I'm not angry you skipped his school recital. I'm angry you believed there would always be a next time, when he only had that time to stand on that stage. And your wife, she didn't leave because you were cruel. She left because being alone next to someone hurts more than being alone in an empty room. And all you offered her in the end was another business plan. Ethan paused again. This time he laid his hand over the words. His eyes lingered, asking something silent of himself. Then he kept going. If I could go back, I wouldn't fix your mistakes. I would just sit beside you and ask, "Are you okay?" Because I know now, behind all those nods of certainty was a man starving to be seen, not through what he achieved, but for simply being human. And today, I write to you not in anger. I used to resent you, but now, I understand. Without you, I would never have learned how to slow down, how to love without needing to win, how to say sorry without expecting forgiveness. Ethan, age 32. If one day you feel empty, please just sit still, not to fix anything, but to listen to the part of you that's still calling your name. Ethan, age 42. When he finished, Ethan folded the letter, neatly, precisely, not to send, not for anyone to read, just to keep. Because for the first time in his life he had faced the one person he'd spent a decade trying to outrun. Himself. The last morning of spring arrived with a hush. Sunlight lay across the stone steps leading out to the small park behind the clinic like a thin veil of honeyed mist. Warm, barely there, just enough to say, "I'm here." No one arranged it. No calendar marked the moment. But both Ethan and Alina knew. Today they would return to the old tree, the one where Ethan once sat alone, after writing a letter to the man he used to be at 32. The letter was in his shirt pocket, folded with care. The fabric had been ironed smooth, as if to hold a silent promise made to himself. Alina said nothing as she wheeled him from the room, but when she looked into his eyes, she saw that the quiet defiance he once carried had softened. There was something else now, an unguarded stillness that knew how to slow down, how to weep without shame. They passed the long corridor where Ethan had once refused to stand, refused to greet anyone. Now, each turn of the wheels stitched back some part of a life that had been torn in silence. At the tree, Alina didn't ask where he wanted to sit. She stopped the chair where the sun touched gently through the leaves. Just enough warmth, just enough breeze to lay a soft quilt across the morning. Ethan placed a hand on the armrest. He leaned forward slightly, but he didn't reach for the letter just yet. He tilted his face up and inhaled, as if learning for the first time that air could carry the scent of surrender. Alina sat beside him. No questions, no noise, just presence, offered freely, with no expectation. After a while, Ethan drew the letter out. He unfolded each crease slowly. The paper was worn, but the pencil marks remained dark, tilted, a little uneven, but steady. The handwriting of a man once too proud to be soft, now learning the strength of being honest. "Have you ever written a letter to yourself?" Ethan asked, his voice low, as though speaking not to her, but to the breeze. Alina shook her head, still watching the branches. "I paint. Every painting is a sentence I didn't know how to say." Ethan smiled. a faint curve. Then he opened the letter, not to read aloud, but to listen to it again, quietly, in the mind. Each line flickered across his memory like a silent film. You think you're invincible. You run because you're afraid people will stop seeing you as unforgettable. But love doesn't come from being on the podium. It lives in the moments when you finally sit down, quietly, and face yourself. The final line, as always, caught his breath. If someone asks, "What did you learn after the accident?" I will say, I learned to breathe slower, to listen deeper, and to sit beside someone, without needing to say a thing. Ethan folded the letter again. His hands trembled slightly. There was no applause, no cinematic swell of music, only the wind in the trees. Only a man letting the wind carry away the part of him that had clung too tightly for too long. Alina turned to him. After a pause, she leaned her head gently onto his shoulder, not pressing, not seeking anything, just close enough to say, "I'm here too." Ethan didn't move, but his heartbeat full, steady. No one had ever rested on his shoulder without needing something from him. Today, someone leaned, not to take, but to share the view. Time passed. Tree's shadow shortened, then shifted. On Ethan's shirt, pockets of sunlight danced and faded. He looked down, saw her hand over his. Not gripping, not holding, just there. A young nurse passed by, about to ask if they needed anything, but when she saw them, still, quiet, entirely at peace, she slowed, then walked away silently. Some moments don't need help. They only need to be left alone, like a cup of tea still steaming, or a song with no words. They sat there a long time. No one brought up the past. No one asked what comes next. And when Ethan turned slightly toward Alina, his eyes, clear, soft, met hers. She didn't look away. Between them, there was no goodbye. No vow about the future. Just silence. And a look that said, "I'm alive again." There was nothing left to say. Nothing left to prove. Just being. Together. Thank you for walking with us through the Paralyzed Millionaire, a 24-chapter journey from fracture to healing, from power to presence, from solitude to silent love. If this story touched something inside you, subscribe to stay close. More journeys are coming, stories where pain is heard and life begins in the quietest places. We're here to tell the stories that already live inside your heart. Until next time.